Feliz Año Nuevo, Andrea.
Feliz Año Nuevo. Good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year 2022. This is the first TLC live of
In a
this
long, long
year.
time.
In a long, long time. Yeah, it's been like 2, 3 weeks.
Yeah, we took a Christmas break.
We took a Christmas break, and I went to Spain again, Madrid, beautiful, to spend time with the family. And, that city is magical. And then back to real life.
Back to reality. So, Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to 2022. It's going to be an exciting year. We got a lot of politics ahead of us. As you know, we have the primaries coming up for both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party sometime in March, April, May, maybe June. I guess it all depends on what the courts do. But we do have primaries coming up. We have a slate chock full of great candidates, and we're going to have one on this morning. In just a minute, we'll introduce you to them. And then right after the primaries, we go into the 2022 general election in November. Obviously, it's not a presidential election, but we do have gubernatorial races and state rep races, and a number of senators are up. And, of course, we got a hotly contested attorney general race in the state of Texas. We have races across the country. People are excited on the conservative side because poll after poll after poll continues to show that the disapproval rate for President Biden is tanking. And in addition to that, poll after poll is showing that Hispanics are now engaged in this massive shift from voting pretty liberal Democrat, which they've always had, for example, here in South Texas, and they're moving over and migrating over to the conservative Republican side. So that's pretty exciting. And we're going to talk about that trend and more issues with a respected professor from the University of Houston later on in the program.
Correct.
So, ¿quién tenemos invitado hoy? Porque tenemos un candidato muy importante que se postula para la Corte Criminal en el condado de Harris.
Y ya lo habíamos tenido acá en el programa hablando precisamente sobre el crimen, el índice de criminalidad y lo que está ocurriendo aquí en el condado Harris. Así que...
And he's not a rookie, no es novato.
No, para nada. Julian Ramirez.
Better known in English as Julian Ramirez.
Julian Ramirez.
Former prosecutor
Correct.
of Harris County for many, many years, did a great job of trying cases on behalf of the people of Harris County. Back when Harris County actually used to prosecute crimes and judges used to hold the defendants accountable for showing back up and putting a bond on them, unlike what's happening today where they're releasing violent criminals on personal recognizance or low-cost bonds back out into the streets. And as a consequence, 150 innocent Harris County and City of Houston citizens have become victims of the most horrific type of violent crime, and that is a homicide at the hands of people that should have been incarcerated or at least have had a large bond placed on them. So
now, Julian Ramirez is running for a Judge 248 Criminal District Court.
Correct. So, Julian, welcome. Thank you for being the first guest in 2022 on TLC Live.
Thank you for having me, Orlando and Andrea. Happy New Year to you. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
Good to be seen.
Huh?
It's good to be seen.
It's good to be seen, and I want to also not only wish you a happy New Year 2022, but also thank you for supporting us in the big event that we have back in December 19 last year. Last year is just like last year. It's a couple of days ago. Yeah. Last year that we were at the Azteca Farmers Market, where Efrain Gonzalez, the owner, hosts one of the biggest Christmas event for all the families in needs. We were able to give at least 1,500 gifts, toys for the kids. And also we were raffling things, and you were over there shaking hands with people and getting to know everybody, and for them to getting to know you. That is very important to go back to the community.
Well, I'm glad I had that opportunity. There were a lot of good people out there. I got to see some old friends and to meet some new friends and supporters. And so it was a very worthwhile event. Glad I went.
And then I understand on Monday you were actually in and around the Denver Harbor area, and you were visiting with a fine group of gentlemen here in Harris County known as the Barrio Boys. How was that?
That's right. I got to have breakfast with the famous Barrio Boys. Great group of guys, many of whom are veterans who have served this country and are proud of it. and want to preserve it and make sure that it's safe for everyone. And so we had a lot to talk about. The reception was very warm there. I was glad to meet them, and I intend on going back there. And,
I understand
renewing that friendship.
I understand they gave you an opportunity to join the barrio.
That's right. So reunited with the barrio. I actually grew up on the north side of Rosenberg,
Oh yeah,
which was a barrio onto itself. And so, yes, I think we have a lot of shared experiences.
good. Well, listen. Speaking of growing up, let's. Why don't you share a little bit about your background for folks that don't know you? Where did you grow up? Where were you born? What's your academic background? What got you interested in pursuing the law and protecting the citizens of the state of Texas?
You bet. I grew up in Rosenberg, Texas, a small town about 30 miles southwest of Houston, and had a great family life. I was blessed to have a wonderful mom and dad who taught me great values and showed me the value of hard work. My dad supported our family. Actually, we supported our family by running a family grocery store, and I learned a lot working there. Went to public schools, graduated, went to the University of Texas, where I stayed not only to get my undergraduate degree, but to get a law degree as well from the University of Texas School of Law. And then went into public service. I was hired by Johnny Holmes, district attorney here in Harris County. So it was a little like coming back home. And I worked as a prosecutor for many years there. I didn't know how long I was going to stay there when I first joined the office, but I grew to love the work and what we were doing there and came to really believe in it. And so I stayed. I stayed there for more than 27 years. And so a lot of different experiences I got there. I handled many criminal cases, from the least serious you can imagine. I started out handling the misdemeanors, the DWIs, the shoplifting, the traffic offenses, and then got the experience and went on to handle death penalty capital cases. I tried 10 of those. They made me, while I was there, the chief of the Public Integrity Division, and also the chief of the Civil Rights Division. So that experience told me that they trusted me with some of the most complex and sensitive matters that a DA handles, to handle those. And so very fulfilling career there. Retired at the end of 2016, but continued actually to work as a special prosecutor. A number of our judges had need to appoint special prosecutors, and they turned to me to handle a number of those. And so I've been working my way through those since then.
Julian, last time that we have you on the show, we were talking about the crime rate and everything. What made you decide from that moment till now to run for office in this as a judge?
Well, as I told you guys, I think at the time I wasn't planning on running for anything, but I was recruited to run, essentially. The party reached out to my wife and I and said, "Hey, you guys need to run." And I thought, okay, why do I want to do that? I'm happy where I am.
By the way, how many years have I been asking you to do that?
A long time, Orlando, and you finally won.
Okay.
So I took that pitch seriously, and what I did was I did some research to find out, what's going on down there, who are some of the judges, and I was very disturbed with what I found. I knew that we had some problems down there. I did not know the extent of it. I did some research on the 248th Criminal District Court. I did a Google search of the current incumbent judge there and found just some horror stories all over the media, stories about how that judge had released people charged with dangerous, violent offenses on low bonds or even PR bonds who had gone on to murder, allegedly, a number of innocent folks here in Harris County. The story I looked at said that 8 people had been killed by folks that the judge had released on low bonds or PR bonds, which are essentially signature promising to appear. It's like you get a traffic ticket and you sign saying you'll appear in court when your court date comes up, right? So dangerous individuals. And that told me that our bail laws were not being followed. We had a perfectly good bail law on the books that said when a judge sets bail, they need to consider a number of factors, including the safety of the community and the safety of the victim. And clearly, That statistic and other things that I'd read indicated to me that the judge was not following the law, and the consequences have been disastrous. And so that's why I decided, you know what, I really don't have a good reason not to step in and try to help the situation. And so that's why I'm here.
Well, to me, that's the ultimate sacrifice that someone can make, is to run for public office. You know, a lot of people say, well, politicians this and politicians that, but there are some that do appreciate the hard work of those engaged in politics. I mean, the campaigning alone is arduous. It's hard on your family. It's hard on you. It's not an easy process. And then, of course, serving the public, is tough, because it's a big county, and the courts are backlogged, and now you have to deal with COVID, and the whole situation about just simple things that we shouldn't have to deal with, like jury assembly room. We don't even have a decent jury assembly room in Harris County, and so my hat's off to you, Julian, for deciding to serve and continue to serve the people of Harris County. It's an important task. Talk to us a little bit about, because a lot of people, unfortunately, and I think this, Julian, everybody knows about the presidential race, right? When there's a contest for president, everybody knows something about in 2020, and they know something about Donald Trump, or they know something about Joseph Biden. They have some cursory knowledge of those running in the primaries, but when you get down very granular, like in counties, at Harris County, people don't know the judges. People don't know the issues. People don't know the difference between county courts at law, state district courts that are criminal courts, that are civil courts. They don't know about family courts. They don't know about, the probate courts. So talk to us about the difference in those, at least from the criminal side. What are the differences in Harris County? Explain to the public why it's important that we have good jurists at state district courts.
Well, I totally agree with you, Orlando. And I sympathize with the voter. It's very hard to wade through all of our judicial races, but it's very important that the voters do their homework, because above all, we want judges who are going to follow the law. Judges are not supposed to be legislators. They're not supposed to be policymakers, right? We elect legislators to go to Austin and do that on our behalf. We elect a governor, to consider legislation that's been passed and to sign legislation into law. Our judges are supposed to follow the law and apply it in a given case. And what I've seen, unfortunately, is that a number of our judges, including the judge of the 248th, have begun implementing their own progressive agenda to the detriment of our citizens. To answer your question, Orlando, we want judges to follow the law, because when they do that, our community is safer. Now, this particular court, Orlando, the 248th, is a criminal court. It handles the most serious crimes that are on our books: capital murders, robbery, sexual assaults, child abuse cases, and so forth. So very serious cases. And so we need qualified judges who are going to follow the law on these types of cases.
You bring up an interesting point, Julian, because I try to explain, not everybody understands government and how it works. But let me explain, because you bring up an interesting point. People need to realize that what you will be looking at when the state brings a defendant to you that has allegedly committed a crime in your court, when you're on the bench, you have one instrument to look at, and that's called the Texas Penal Code. Is that correct?
We have the Penal Code. We also have the Code of Criminal Procedure, which contains our bail laws. And we also have the state constitution and the federal constitution.
Right.
And judges need to be familiar with all of those.
Correct. But people need to realize that the Penal Code is the most, in my opinion, one of the most democratic instruments that we know of, because it is a product of the people. In other words, we elect state representatives and senators, a lieutenant governor, and the governor. A criminal law, has to follow that process. It's originated in the House and the Senate. It has to be agreed on by both chambers, right? And then it has to pass and be read 3 times. And then it's got to go to the governor, and then it's adopted into the penal code. That's the representation. Those are the values of the people of the state of Texas. And so what you're telling us, Julian, is that sometimes people that don't agree with the democratic process and how those laws were made go rogue. And that's what we have in Harris County. We have judges that have gone rogue. They said, no, we don't care about, the occupations code and the bail bond system. We're going to do our own thing. And that's dangerous to a democracy. Am I right or wrong?
Well, I think you're right, Orlando. We definitely have judges who have not followed the law, especially the law that talks about the setting of bail in serious criminal cases. And it's hurt us. We've had people victimized because of that. And so we need to replace those judges who are not doing a good job. And that's why I'm running.
A lot of folks don't understand, but again, I remember a particular case, and I don't know, probably you may not be able to comment. I can talk about it. If you can comment, go ahead and comment. But I think one particular case that really was egregious out of this court from the current judge, the Democrat judge, was a case in which resulted in a Hispanic woman going to McDonald's, and there she was confronted by a defendant and tried to snatch her purse, and unfortunately she ended up dying. She was apparently run over, left to die in the parking lot at a McDonald's on the East End. The perpetrator of that crime, if I'm not mistaken, was one of those being adjudicated, that was a defendant appearing before the judge that you plan to run against.
Well, Orlando, I am somewhat familiar with news reports of that case, and you are right. It is a case out of the 248th, and you are also right that I probably should not comment on it. As a judicial candidate, if I were to be elected, I would have to preside over that case. And so I don't want to say anything that might cause someone to think I couldn't be fair on that case or any other.
Okay, well, that's fair enough, but I wanted to highlight for who's ever watching the program is that people need to know that you're running to replace that judge that allowed that man to kill that woman who happened to be Hispanic and a grandmother in a parking lot at a McDonald's. That is unacceptable. Of course, that's my opinion. That's not Julian saying it. And that's why I'm delighted that Julian is running to replace that judge in the 248th District Court in Harris County. And Andrea, we have some comments?
Yeah, we have a question. So, what are the consequences to the incumbent judge for having contributed to the death and endangerment of the community via them allowing violent criminals? I don't see it well.
Well, neither do I. We got 2 old people over here. Criminals. Leniency.
Leniency on bail.
On bail, yeah.
Yes, and I think I understand the question. Thank you for asking and for watching. What the judge has done are judicial acts within their discretion that's given by law. Now, they might be outside the law. They might not have followed the law. But the fact that she's exercised her lawful discretion is going to mean that she can't really be held accountable outside of the electoral process for those actions, right? So where we need to hold judges like her accountable is at the ballot box. And so come November, that's what I'm seeking to have done, is to have the community, Harris County, all of Harris County, by the way, act to make a change there.
Julian, I want to ask you, what is the issues or your platform that you're proposing to make a difference, to change what is going on right now? And of course, it takes a village to do this. I mean, it's not just your position is going to change everything, but at least, little by little, we need to all come together with some platform, with some solutions, with efforts. So what is going to be your issues in your campaign? And I want to remind people that this is for the primaries. After that is going to be the general elections, but we're going to concentrate on the primaries right now.
That's right. And let me first say, Andrea, I have a website up where folks can go and learn more about my candidacy, experience, background, and so forth. It's Julian Ramirez 4judge.com, all spelled out. All right. So as far as a platform, Andrea, it's very simple. Number one is follow the law as it's written, as it's been passed by our legislature and signed into law by our governor. If we do that, that solves a whole lot of problems. I also want to make, I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
I also want to make it a priority that we consider public safety when we do what we're supposed to in that court. Public safety is one of the main priorities or objectives of our penal code. If you go to the penal code, you look on page 1, it's going to talk about public safety as being one of the prime objectives. I don't feel that, at least in the 248th, public safety is valued very much, and that disturbs me a great deal. So I would say, let's follow the law, number one. Let's give public safety the priority that it deserves, that was intended by our legislature. Let's treat all defendants fairly and equally under the law and make sure their rights are not violated, right? And let's operate the court in an efficient and effective manner and treat everyone who comes before the court, including all the lawyers, all the witnesses, all the defendants, etc., courteously and respectfully. If elected, that's what I intend to do, Andrea, and I think it would be a huge improvement over what we have now.
Julian, what's the irony of it is if a taxpayer goes to the criminal courts building downtown, you have to go through a metal detector and security checks. When you walk into the courtroom, there is a bailiff and there are sheriffs there protecting the judge, protecting the jurors. And so to me, the irony is that these judges serve with all this protection around them, right? Because they have alleged violent offenders coming before the bench in the court. So they have metal detectors, they have security, they have sheriffs throughout the entire building to protect the judiciary, as it should be, and to protect the jurors. But the idea that they would turn these violent criminals out onto the streets without any accountability so they can create mayhem, to me, is beyond the pale. And so that's why we're glad you're running. Now, as Andrea always says, because we have our next guest coming up, is call to action. What can the voters, what can the viewers do to help you win this position in the 248th State District Court of Harris County?
All right. They can learn more about my candidacy by visiting my website or relying on what I've told you now. They can make a commitment that they are going to go vote when the opportunity arises in November, right? It's a long time to November. For a candidate, it's going to go by very quickly. But for the voters, we need to remember that it's important to vote on election day or during the early voting period. Not only that, they need to get their friends out to vote. They need to educate their friends, their neighbors, their family members, and make sure they go and vote. If there's someone in the community that they know who's not registered to vote, let's get them registered. That's the only way we're going to win and take back this particular court, is if we get out and vote. And so that's what we're really asking people to do, Orlando.
Julian, let's remind people about primaries, because you're running now in the primaries. So do you know how many people are in for the Republican?
He doesn't have a
He
primary
doesn't
opponent.
have a primary.
He is our nominee.
Okay, so that's very
right.
important, because we have a lower rate when it comes to go in the primaries, to vote in the primaries, and I think it's very important to make people conscious that this is very important too.
I think.
And can I say one more thing on that regard?
Somebody else.
And I'm happy to be unopposed in my primary. And I would point out that the incumbent has been primaried herself, right? She has a challenger in her primary, which says volumes about the job that she's doing, the poor job that she's doing. But I want to also tell the voters, Orlando, that the judicial races are sort of further down the ballot. You will not find them at the top of the ballot. So you're going to have to work your way down to find the courts that are so important to our community. don't just stop at the top of the ballot. Go all the way down and vote in every race,
All right,
including the
Julian.
248th District Court.
Well, thank you for joining us. We hope to have you back. We're getting a little bit of an echo, so we're going to move on to our next guest. Keep up the hard work. Congratulations for deciding to serve the citizens of Harris County, and we'll see you soon. Okay, who's our
Thank you for
next
having me.
guest? You bet.
Julian, gracias. Well, our next guest is a very old friend. Not old because he's old, no. Not old because I'm old, no. It's just like, back in the time, on my time on television.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I'm going to talk to Mark a little bit. We're getting an echo in here, so we're hearing ourselves again. But go ahead. Adelante.
So, Geronimo Cortina, he's an associate professor in the UH Department of Political Science and director of the Center of Mexican American Studies. He has been already in our show, and he is back. He's one of our first guests also in the 2022 TLC Live, because this is a very important year. And when I reached out to him last year, a couple of weeks ago, I said, like, I wanted you to talk about the elections 2022, the importance of these elections, even though that is not a presidential elections. Talk about the primaries around the corner. Why is the WSJ reporting now that more Hispanics
Well,
are...
tell people what the WSJ is, first of all.
the Washington...
The Wall Street
The
Journal.
Wall Street Journal.
Okay.
The Wall Street Journal. So why more Hispanics are decided to run for the conservative side? So all of these things are very important, and on the 2022, it's very important to explain to people, to our community, why it's important to go and vote in the primaries, but why it's important to vote in the midterm elections. So welcome, Jeronimo Cortina.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Orlando, for having me.
Bienvenido y
Always
feliz
a pleasure.
año.
Igualmente, muchas gracias.
You know, I wanted to say, Professor, that I'm a graduate of the University of Houston, and I took several courses from Tacho Mendiola at the Center for Mexican American Studies, which I thought were fascinating. It was quite an eye-opener for me, so I'm glad that the department is doing well, and I'm glad that you're at the helm. So let's talk a little bit about this phenomenon. You know, I have been in politics in Harris County for 25 plus years, and when I first started, Professor, I think back in 1992, I was probably the only Hispanic that had filed to seek a nomination in the Republican Party. And then today in 2022, as we go into the primary, it is phenomenal to me to see the number of Latinos on both sides, which I've always said is a good thing. I've always said that Latinos don't help themselves by having, you know, all of their eggs in one basket on the political spectrum. And so it's fascinating for me to see the number of Latinos that are now saying, hey, we're going to give a fresh look to the conservative issues, or maybe the Republicans. What do you think, in your opinion, is leading Latinos in Texas, particularly Tejanos, people of multi-generational Mexican Americans, and especially down in the Rio Grande, because you saw this, start to shift? I still don't understand it, and I read polls and I read newspaper articles, but what has been your analysis? What's driving this?
All right, so I think it's a perfect storm. There's a combination of a number of factors that play, especially in 2020. So the first thing that we have to contextualize to a certain extent is, you know, how big is this movement, right? As you correctly said, we saw that some Latinos, especially in Rio Grande Valley, decided to shift their political allegiances. So the first point that I want to make is that Latino partisanship is not as stable as, for example, non-Hispanic whites or African Americans. Latino partisanship tends to be a little bit more fluid, more dynamic, and it's going to be, in many occasions, issue-based. And by issue-based, I mean, for example, in the Rio Grande Valley, what happened during election time? Well, first of all, it's completely an abandonment of the Democratic Party to go and knock on doors and be on the ground on the region. Since the Viva Kennedy clubs were established in the 1960s, there hasn't been a concerted effort by the DNC or the state party to really work their constituency down there. The second part was 2020 election. It was an election that a number of issues regarding, for example, the coronavirus, but also issues regarding the border play a very important role. In the region, the Border Patrol and CBP is one of the biggest employers in the region. So when you see that a potential candidate, in this case Biden, was going to change to a certain extent the rules of the game that have not changed at all, Latinos said like, well, I'm not very sure about these things. Other issues very important regarding oil and gas also had a very important or tend to resonate a little bit more within the Latino electorate down there. To say that there is going to be a significant shift in terms of Latinos supporting at higher rates the Republican Party, I'm not sure at this stage, because Latinos in the Rio Grande Valley represent less than 3% of the Latino electorate. So it's not a huge number of people that change their allegiances. We still are in the upper 60s, 70% when we're looking at Latino support for the Democratic candidates during election time, especially during presidential time. So we have that particular issue. Then, on the other hand, we have, for example, what happened recently in the Lujan versus Frank Ramirez special election back in November, if I remember correctly. Lujan was held the seat.
Professor, I'm gonna interrupt you for just a second.
Yes.
You have an external speaker on, and we're getting it back, an echo. Do you have a speaker on?
Or maybe you have your phone on the Facebook or something that we're
no,
getting.
It's just their pod thingies. Let me see.
We're getting a delay, but like you are watching the program somewhere else or on the phone.
Okay, that's fine. Then continue. That's okay, Professor. Go on.
Let's try this.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other part that we saw is, as I was referring, it was the...
That works.
Okay, perfect. All right. The Lujan Ramirez race that happened, I think, back in November. It was a special election. And is it back?
That's okay. We'll just get through it.
Okay, perfect. So that special election, Lujan, that was the Republican candidate, won that special election 51 versus 49% against Ramirez. Lujan had name recognition. Lujan had out-fundraised Ramirez almost 2-1. He had the whole support of the Republican Party, and he won by 51%. So it's a win. It's a traditionally Democratic district in the south side of San Antonio. But again, Republicans put a lot of effort in winning that district, and that district was basically won by a very small margin, 51 versus 49%. So Lujan also ran a very interesting campaign, and the campaign was centered into I would say, conservative movement that stays within the parameters that Latinos are comfortable moving within. It was not a, what we know now, and some perhaps some journalists and media called Trump Republican. He was more like a traditional Republican that Latinos are used to see, that Latinos are used to interact with. We're talking about a type of conservatism that could be between, Governor Perry early days, Governor Bush's, that type of conservatism, that type of the Republican Party. So when we're looking at Republican Party running more minorities and more Latinos and more women, at least in the primary elections, it is I guess, an indication that, yes, Latinos, if you want to say it this way, Latinos are conservative on many social issues, but also they tend to be liberal in other economic issues, right? For example, Latinos prefer free healthcare, right? But they tend to be a little bit more conservative, for example, on issues regarding gay marriage or issues regarding abortion. But on another issues, they tend to be more liberal. So what I'm saying is that there is space for both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party to go and court the Latino vote significantly. And why is this important, especially in the case of Texas? Because population growth is driven by Latinos. And we have, in this new election year, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of new voters whose majority tend to be Black and brown voters. So the opportunity is there. Who's going to get it? I don't know. And the message that Republicans and Democrats are going to give to these new voters is going to be extremely, extremely important.
You know, it's fascinating to me because, as I told you, I've been in this business for many, many years. And you mentioned about when I remember when President Kennedy, the candidate seeking, the nomination, came to the Rice Hotel in Houston and met with the leaders of LULAC way back in the 60s, and the coalition that was formed, right? And back then, the conservatives really weren't courting the Republican Party, the Latino vote too much, and the Democrats kind of grew that vote, and made all kinds of promises, and continued to receive the vote because it became habitual. Down in South Texas, where I spend a lot of time, a lot of the Latinos, a lot of the Mexican Americans say, well, we vote Democrat because that's what my parents did. That is shifting a little bit. To me, that growth, the willingness of young people to talk about their Latino conservative politics, because as you correctly point out, I think Latino conservatism is a little different than what we're used to as right-wing conservatism, right? But to me, that's fascinating. And so, I've often said, because while we're a nonprofit, trying to educate and motivate the Latino community, we also have a political action committee, a PAC, Texas Latino Conservatives, PAC, where we actually do promote candidates. But I often say on the PAC side, what the Democrats are selling, we Latinos ain't buying. And so this is true. This is like, we've heard the same thing from the Democrats for decades, and they really haven't delivered. And as you point out correctly, down in South Texas, one of the biggest institutions is DHS, Department of Homeland Security. And those young Latinos are serving in the military, they're serving in law enforcement, and they're serving the Border Patrol services. So when the left starts bashing that, there is a political consequence to be paid. Now, what's interesting on the other side, Professor, is that I don't know that the Republican Party, the conservatives, understand how to reach the Latino community. They still don't. It's fascinating to me, and I'm going to be very honest, because one of the things is I in Texas we say I'm the burr in the saddle. I don't see a lot of Republicans in the Second Ward, in Denver Harbor, on the north side of Houston, in Los Barrios. In other words, the traditionally elected Republicans are not comfortable still going into the barrios. And so there was a Newsweek editorial that says this is an interesting opportunity for conservatives in the United States, where the middle class and Latino working class are coming together to give them a little boost. And it will help the Republicans if they don't blow it.
Exactly.
And so it seems to me that you're spot on, that this is an opportunity for both sides. It's an opportunity for the Democrats to kind of figure out where did we go wrong. And it's an opportunity for the Republicans to say, wow, how do we garner a larger percentage of the Latino population?
And by that, if just thinking also in historical terms, when President Ford came to Texas, right, he was eating a tamal without taking out the husk, right? And that's, to me, it's a very good illustration of how the Republican Party wants to talk to Latinos, right? With a tamal, but I'm not going to take out the husk. And then on the other hand, you have President Bush, right? W. Bush, when he was able to really understand the issues, to really understand how the Latino electorate behaved, And he's one of the presidents who have gotten a higher percentage of Latino voters supporting him in the state, but also in his both presidential elections. And the important thing here is that the rhetoric that, for example, President Bush was using, right, was this compassionate conservatism, right? Issues about immigration from a compassionate side, not by breaking the law, not by anything like that, but, first of all, it's an issue, it's here, we have to fix it, and we have to fix it right, we have to fix it in a compassionate way, because everybody wins, right? They win, and we as society win. The rhetoric right now of the Republican Party is going to be 2022 a key year for the Republican Party at the national level, but also at the state level, because we're going to measure and we want to weigh in how much control former President Trump has over the Republican Party. We have a lot of primary elections coming up where former President Trump has endorsed a number of candidates. And by that endorsement, we're going to see how strong is his grasp over the Republican Party. And the Republican Party, on the other hand, if they want to see, for example, it's in these crossroads, right? Is especially here in Texas. One, demographic growth is basically, as I said, driven by Latinos. Younger Latinos tend to be more progressive, more liberal, but still, I think there's opportunity for the Republican Party. And given that growth, the Republican Party has to say, okay, am I going to start investing in this community? As you say, Orlando, going to the Second Ward, to Edo, to North Harris, and knocking doors and explaining what I'm for about, or I'm just going to go with the vitriol and the rhetoric that doesn't serve anyone, but a very, very small constituency of the Republican Party, and see what happens. If the Republican Party takes that route, the Republican Party in Texas and at the national level doesn't have a chance in the near future. I mean, and that's that's a given, given our how we have the electoral college.
So, Professor, let's talk about the primaries. We're weeks before the primaries, and we've been talking with Orlando that the percentage of the Latinos that vote in the primaries is very low in history. How do we change that? What we can do to change that? Not only that we're seeing now that more Latinos are running for office, that's something historical that we never saw that before in that amount of time, but how do we change the fact that we have the conscience to go and vote in the primaries, because it's as important as vote in primaries as important to vote in the general elections, because that will make a difference also not only in our community, but now that these candidates, the Latino candidates.
Professor, I want to follow up with that because Andrea brings up an interesting point. In the entire political process in this state, the Latinos have not really participated. And let me just give you an example.
And in general, in elections, because,
but I'm just talking about in all the integral parts of politics. For example, with respect to precinct chairs, we don't have, they make up the executive committee of each party. We have very few Latinos. We have very few Latinos that are participating in the SREC, the State Republican Executive Committee, which, by the way, sets the platform, the rules committee, all of those things. If you look at campaign contribution and expenditure reports that are filed with the Texas Ethics Commissioner, Professor, you will see very few names as donors that are Latinos. Yeah, we might have a Vicente here and Orlando there and a Jeronimo aquí, pero in general, they tend to be Caucasian names. What can we do to get the Latino community more involved in the political process? Because as I look around, for example, just to give you an idea, the business community in the state of Texas many years ago formed an organization called TLR, Texans for Lawsuit Reform. To me, that was a prime example of how, the Caucasian community, the white business people, can rally behind an issue and really motivate people to get them excited about changing the course of public policy in the state of Texas. Latinos, not so much. So, what can we do to motivate Hispanics to take up the issues, to get involved in the political process?
Well, I think I think we're seeing it now. If you look, for example, at recent trends, especially from the 2016 to the 2020 election, 2018 election, we see more Latinos and young Latinos, right, participating at higher rates in comparison to previous years. So that's a good indication because, you know, these new wave of young Latinos participating in the political process are completely socialized into the American political mainstream. And by socialization, I mean they understand the political process, they understand the role of primaries, they understand the role of elections, etc., etc., etc. But, you know, by definition, our electoral system is extremely complicated in comparison to other electoral systems out there. The second part, I think, is that in order for someone to be, I guess, enthused to participate in the political process, it's a two-way street. On the one hand, it's political parties have a duty and a responsibility to court these voters. That means, you know, you're going to invest in outreach campaigns, you're going to invest in developing leadership, starting to develop leadership, and you're going to invest in getting people out to vote. The problem with the Latino vote, as Andrea said, is a catch-22 situation, especially for candidates and political parties. So if I'm a political party or if I'm a candidate and I'm running in a particular election, and I know that voter X, let's say John Doe, right, the probability given his demographics, voter history, so on and so forth, I know that he or she is going to be, you know, let's say 80% more likely to go out and vote. On the other hand, I have Joe Ramirez, right? And Joe Ramirez, you know, given his demographics, the chances that he would go and participate are 40%. So if I have limited resources, if I have limited campaign funds, where am I going to put my money? Well, I'm going to invest my money in that Joe Doe 80% chance to go out and vote, because I cannot risk, right, my very, very small resources, limited resources that I have, an investment in Joe Ramirez that may or may not, right, turn out on election day, and, you know, he may cost me my election. So if political parties, and this is the very interesting conversation that I haven't heard neither the Republicans or Democrats putting, is like, hello, the demographic, the characteristics of the electorate are changing. If you do not invest right now, as we speak, in this new demographic, we're going to lose it. Or we're just going to allow a very, very, very small part of the electorate that is shrinking to have control and elect their members that have their interests. And the other part that I always do is education. Education is extremely important. You know, if I tell my students, if you don't go out and vote, right, you're going to allow a 65 plus individual, right, to dictate what are going to be his preferences, his needs, his wants, and whatnot. And those preferences do not, I can guarantee you right now, their preferences, their needs, they want, do not align with your preferences, your needs, and your wants. So basically, you're giving control and you're giving all the power to a group of the electorate that does not have the same interests that you have. And, you know, if they elect a particular representative, the representative's duty, right, is to represent his or her constituency. And they're not doing anything wrong. Their fault is not of the elected representative. The fault is yours because you did not participate in the electoral process. And it's like training for a marathon. This thing is going to take time. It's not going to be like, oh, tomorrow we have 70% turnout of Latino voters. No, that's not going to happen. It has to be little by little, little by little, little by little. So I think that that's a conversation that both parties internally need to have as we speak.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting observation, Professor, because I have this all the time. I have this, I'm fascinated. Obviously, as you know, I have a long history as a conservative in Texas and as a Republican, but I continue to get fascinated that a lot of Republicans don't understand the Latino community. They, you know, I'm gonna. This is kind of funny, but at the same time, it's sad. Many Republicans believe that Latinos are Mexican and particularly Mexican of the indigenous population. I mean, they are so far removed from the Latino world that's not even funny. I always tell them, do you know that there are Latinos that are African American that are black? Do you know there are Latinos that were born in China that multi generational may have lived in Mexico City or Nicaragua? Do you know that there's European based Latinos that are from Argentina? I mean, they are absolutely clueless. They don't understand. And so, my job is not only to educate the Latino community to participate in the American political process, because you're right. If you don't speak up, if you don't vote, you're giving the vote to somebody else, right? But my other job is to educate Republicans on what the Latino community is, which to me is a fascinating task. And inevitably, Professor, the Republicans, I can't speak for the Democrats, and Andrea's here to she can share her experience because she's been involved with this. They get all excited come November election, right? But in the off season, instead of doing spring training, as you said, investing in the Latino community, they're nowhere around. And so
Right.
it's the same. I agree. I mean,
And Professor, you just touched one of the points that we were discussing last night, and I said this is not going to happen from one day to another. It's going to be a long process, and we're probably not going to see it this year. We're probably not going to see it in 2 years, but little by little, if we don't start right now, as you were saying, if we don't start, as you say, hello, we're here, and 2020 census just show us that we are the fastest growing community, and if we're not start doing this right now, and if they don't start doing this right now and investing in our community, they're gonna lose, because it's going to be a long process. It's something that they haven't done in years, in decades. And if they don't start realizing right now, and if they don't start like really doing their homework, they're going to lose. And we're taking
Right.
over. And we're not going nowhere. We're just growing
now
and keep growing.
hey Andrea, don't be so threatening. We're taking over. This sounds like a
We're
this sounds
taking
like a
over.
Caribbean coup over here.
Well, I mean, but it's also important for the economy. It's important for the business community, right? If we don't start, facilitating and allowing more members of the Latino community, not because they're special or we're special or whatever, it's just because of sheer numbers, right? Think
Yeah.
about, just supply and demand. If we don't put kids, for example, through college, who's going to buy those 500,000 houses?
Yeah.
Who's going to buy the Mercedes Benz or the BMWs or this or that? You need people that has gone through higher education in order to have a very good job, in order to make good money, in order to make and buy the house, the car, the big TV, etc., etc. And if not, is the importance and the curse and the opportunity that we have in terms of this demographic shift. And what I've seen is that, yes, we have made very significant improvements in terms of access to higher education, in terms of political participation, in terms of elected officials. We have Lina Hidalgo, we have a significant number of members of the House and the State Senate, Latinos, etc., etc. But still, we're very, very, very far behind where we need to be in order to maintain a
Well,
competitive
let me give you an
economy.
example, Professor. You're obviously aware. I would challenge anyone when you talk about how far behind Latinos are in a major city like Houston. If you look up the members of the Greater Houston Partnership, it's shocking the absence of Latinos in corporate boards in Houston. To me, that's
Oh yeah.
always amazed me. Latinos have almost zero representation in the top corporations that call Houston home. That to me is
Right.
still shocking. And boy, you talk about a long way to go. But that to me, and the silence, let's say by organizations like the Greater Houston Partnership, and even to some extent the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, about the dearth, the lack of Latino representation on boards of directors in Houston is shocking to me. But anyway, let me move on to another point, and that is, I personally think that having people like Eva Guzman, for example, or Vidal
Mm.
Martinez running for high profile positions is a good way for the conservatives and the Republican to get their message out to the Latino community. Do you agree with that or not?
Well, I think I think that it's important for uh, having Judge Guzman and other candidates running for these high profile uh, uh, positions, because, as you say, it's a signal, right? It's a signal to the Republican Party saying, "Hey, I'm here. I'm gonna be running. I'm not going anywhere." That's the first message. The second question is, in terms of support, in terms of this party support, and in terms of how those resources within the party are being distributed. So that I have no idea. I had never run in my life or anything like that. But that's also a very important conversation that needs to happen within the party. And I think that in order to have a very good strategy to go from point A to point B, that internal discussion needs to happen before the messaging goes outside
Let me tell
to
you,
the community.
I couldn't agree more with you, and that's part of another conversation, is how do you begin to convince the Republican infrastructure to begin making the investment? Because unfortunately, I can tell you, as somebody that's been doing this for more than 2 decades, it really ain't happening yet. I mean, it's starting to, but this is what's critical. And I go back to that Newsweek editorial. The Republicans could do well if they don't blow it.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I agree. It's how they're going to do it. I mean, and the potential for blowing up is significantly high, given what we have seen within the Republican Party at the national level, and also
Yeah.
here at the state level in the past year or so. So it's there. We'll see.
Yeah, I hope that I agree. I hope the mistakes of the past aren't repeated. But let me just tell you, because we're running out of time, Professor, and we'll talk about this again. I have been for years trying to convince the Republican leadership that it's time for the Republicans to take immigration reform by the horns and posit a good immigration reform policy, because Latinos, at the end of the day, when we vote, immigration isn't the number one issue. But what's detrimental to the Republicans is they don't know how to talk about immigration. And so they
Right.
always revert back to those Mexicans crossing the border, when we know that people coming across the border nowadays are what they call OTMs, other than Mexicans. We have a great
Right.
relationship with Mexico. I tell people all the time, you ought to thank your lucky stars that your neighbor is Mexico,
Yeah.
our biggest trading partner here in Texas. And Republicans still don't get that message. So I am
Yeah, but
hopeful.
I totally agree, and it is. The business community wants it. Uh, Everybody wants it, and it's an issue that you know uh, it has to be balanced to a certain extent. How we're going to do that, I think that the business community has to take the lead and pressure elected officials and say, if you don't fix this problem, I'm not going to be supporting you anymore,
Yeah,
and the problem needs to be fixed,
yeah.
and as simple as that.
I think
So we'll
that's a
see.
big issue. I think if Republicans learn about the issue, I think if they come up with, and listen, a pathway to citizenship doesn't have to be included in the legislation. We have something called family stabilization. Document the undocumented that has not violated the criminal code here in Texas. Renew those permits every 5 years. Let them work. Let them travel back and forth to their native country, and everything will be hunky dory. But Republicans are afraid of their own shadows sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with you.
All right, my friend. Bueno, le vamos a desear le deseamos un feliz año nuevo con mucha salud. Ojalá todo esto del corona ya se acabe. Y lo invitamos para que regrese. Ha sido muy amable para dedicarnos media hora de su tiempo.
Encantado de la vida. Siempre un placer estar contigo, Orlando, y contigo, Andrea. Muy feliz año, and all the best for you and your family.
Professor Cortina, we're going to invite you again because this 2022 it's hot water in politics.
All right, Andreas.
Encantado.
Muchas gracias. Nos vemos pronto.
Hasta
Bueno,
luego.
pues,
Bye-bye.
wow. Me encanta.
Good program to start off the year with a lot of political activity.
You see, and I like that we follow our conversation last night about what we were talking about the primaries, and we came with the middle point. He gave us his point of view and a political,
which I agree with.
Yeah, and
but he said it. Candidates use their limited resources to win, not to promote and encourage people to vote.
Well, I understand, but things need to be changed a little bit.
But that's the parties that are responsible for that, not the candidates.
I understand.
Class will begin at 4:30 again today with Andrea over a glass of adult beverage. But in the meantime, join us next Wednesday at the same time, same channel. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you. Stay safe. And by the way, if you've been vaxxed 3 times, don't worry. There's apparently a new variant, the French variant, and now they have a pill. So look, it's all good. See you next week.
All good. Well, no, visit us in TexasLatinoConservatives.com, TexasLatinoConservatives.com. And don't forget that we're going to have Leadership Latino at the end of the month. It's going to be January 29. It's going to be in El Paso. It's already confirmed. And just visit us in the website and you're going to see all the details. Just register and we're all going to be there in El Paso. I haven't been in El Paso in 20 years. Last time I went to cover something. I don't even remember when I went to cover over there.
Well, we're going to show you Rosa's Cantina.
Rosa's Cantina, okay.
Right.
So we'll see you over there in El Paso on the 29th. But for now, gracias por habernos acompañado y nos vemos el próximo miércoles. See you.